What's going on, guys? It's Trevito back at it again with another in-depth guide. The head of the Kamisato clan is returning. From his husbando status to his undeniable ability to make his opponents wet, Ayato can be an incredible Hydro DPS to add to your team. In this guide, I will discuss his playstyles, talents, constellations, best weapons, team comps, and rotations. If you enjoy the guide, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me out an absolute ton. Let me know in the comments below if you have him or you're pulling for him. With that being said, let's get right into it. Starting off with playstyles, Ayato is a very flexible on-field Hydro DPS that works in a lot of different teams, but can also be used as a quick swap or off-field unit. During his skill, he rapidly slashes in a wide frontal cone to apply Hydro and damage enemies. His kit can be seen as a very simple one, yet I personally find it deeply satisfying to play him. If you enjoy a simple but fun playstyle with a lot of team options, then pay attention as we get deeper into his kit. Moving on to talents, normal attack, Kamisato, art, Marobashi, up to a 5-string normal attack combo. Not something you will be using too often, you will mainly attack during his skill uptime. Elemental skill, Kamisato art, Kyoka, the bread and butter of his kit. Ayato shifts stances and enters an enhanced state. The short dash will happen in your directional input, and he leaves a watery illusion at his original position, which will explode when opponents are near or the duration ends. This explosion is considered skill damage and will deal Hydro AoE DPS. Now for the most central part of his kit, what happens during the enhanced state. First of all, his normal attacks are converted into AoE Hydro damage and cannot be overridden. This damage is considered normal attack damage but does not scale off his normal attacks. This damage still scales off the skill multipliers, which can be a confusing aspect of Ayato's kit. This essentially only means that you do not need to worry about leveling up his normal attacks at all, and it will affect which artifacts and weapons are most impactful for him. Hitting an opponent with an enhanced attack will grant Ayato the Namasin effect, basically a very small stacking buff based off his max HP that gets added to the damage. His main scaling still comes from attacks, so this does not warrant using an HP sans, but it means that HP rolls are not useless. Ayato also gets increased resistance to interruption and cannot use charge or plunging attacks during this state. After activating the skill, you can hit for 15 times at a baseline, and the Hydro application has a standard ICD of every 3 hits or 2.5 seconds. Attack speed modifiers will change this. For example, if you are affected by cryo, you will attack slower and get less hits in, and if you buff your attack speed, you will be able to hit more. The fact that he is affected by attack speed further increases the amount of teams he can be played in. The enhanced attacks do not snapshot buffs. His attack range is quite large and is actually able to hit enemies pulled up into the air by Venti's burst. He will generate 1 to 2 Hydro particles every 2 seconds for a total of 3 to 6 over his skill duration. This interval is not affected by attack speed. Moving on to Elemental Burst. Ayato spawns a large Hydro field, and while this field is in play, Bloom Water Blades will rain down and attack opponents, dealing Hydro damage. It also increases the normal attack damage of active characters within the field. It has an 18-second duration with a 20-second cooldown. When we're talking about talent leveling priority, skill over burst and normal attack can be left at 1. Very straightforward. Ayato's passives. A1. Ayato will gain 2 Namasin stacks when his skill is activated. When the water illusion explodes, he will gain a Namasin effect equal to the maximum numbers of stacks possible. The maximum Namasin stacks at a baseline is 4. A4. If Ayato is not on the field and his energy is less than 40, he will generate 2 energy for himself every second. This can be a welcomed addition to lowering his ER needs in a burst support role where you activate his burst and swap off, but will unfortunately not see much value in teams where Ayato is the on-field DPS. Moving on to Constellations, C1. Ayato's elemental skill damage is increased by 40% against opponents with 50% HP or less. A decent con, but it's limited to enemies under 50% HP. Constellation 2. Namasin's maximum stack count is increased to 5 from the previous 4. When Ayato has at least 3 stacks, his max HP is increased by 50%. This HP buff is based off his base health. Assuming level 90, base health is 13,715, so this would equal to 6,857.5 max HP. Assuming roughly 20k effective max health for a level 90 Ayato, this constellation would boost his health to roughly 27,000. On screen is going to be a math example explaining a little bit more. Math aside, this constellation increases his Namasan bonus by almost 70%. In most cases, this would translate to about a 20% DPS increase to his normal attack damage, more or less. Constellation 3 and 5. C3 increases his elemental skill damage. With how skill reliant Ayato is, this is one of his best constellations. C5 increases his burst damage. C4 Endless Flow. After using his burst, all nearby party members will have 15% increased normal attack speed for 15 seconds. A very decent constellation, but not a must-have. C6 Boundless Origin. After using Ayato's skill, his next enhanced attack will create 2 extra strikes when they hit opponents, each one dealing 450% of Ayato's attack. Both of these extra attacks will not be affected by Namasan. A notable amount of damage increase here at the very steep cost of a C6 constellation. An important question: weapon versus constellations. Ayato's signature weapon is quite strong on him. Unfortunately, his constellations are mediocre at best. Compared to other constellations in the game, his signature weapon would actually provide more power increase than both his C1 and C2 combined. I would strongly recommend going for his signature weapon before constellations. With that being said, always spend responsibly and within your means. Moving on to artifacts. 4-piece Echoes of an Offering. Ayato's best in-slot set and the set designed for him. When normal attacks hit an enemy, you get a chance to trigger a buff to your next normal attack, increasing in chance every time it fails to proc. However, the effect registers on server side, meaning that it is ping dependent. If you have high ping, you will get some hits that do not proc the effect at all. Note, it is also not the most resin efficient domain to grind, being paired with Vermilion unless you're a Giga Shao main like me. It is only marginally better than other options. Be wary of this when deciding whether or not to go for the set. 4-piece Heart of Depth. Its 2-piece offers a hydro damage bonus. Its 4-piece boosts normal and charge attack damage after using your skill. Ayato can take full effect of the set with 100% uptime, and it is one of his best sets. Arguably more resin efficient than Echoes, pairing with Blizzard Strayer, and you now have the option to strongbox it. 4-piece Glad. The 2-piece effect gives an attack percent, and the 4-piece effect boosts normal attack damage if the wielder uses a sword, claymore, or pole-arm. Also one of Ayato's best sets, since he does not need to use charge or plunge attacks, this artifact set is great on him and he utilizes the full passive. 4-piece Hunter. The 2-piece effect offers a normal and charge attack bonus, and the 4-piece effect stacks crit rate when the character's HP changes. When Ayato is paired with Farina, this becomes his strongest option, giving a whopping 36% crit rate with 3 stacks. The sheer amount of stats provided by the set with full passive is hard to compete with for any other set. It'll only proc when the user is on field and does restrict your team options. Situationally, it is his best set though. While Ayato may be an incredible on-field DPS, he actually has some great sets for a burst support build. Starting off with 4-piece Emblem of Severed Fate. The 2-piece effect offers energy recharge, and the 4-piece effect gives an elemental burst damage. It's his best option for off-field burst support playstyle. 4-piece Noblesse Oblige. The 2-piece effect offers an elemental burst damage, and the 4-piece effect increases the party's attack percent after casting the burst. Less personal damage than Emblem, but aims to buff your party more. 2-piece. Any 2-piece combination of hydro damage, attack percent, ER, burst damage, or normal attack can absolutely work on him. Mix and match high substats for the best result, but aim to get a 4-piece set if possible. Honorable mention, 4-piece Thundering Fury. The 2-piece effect is completely useless for Ayato, but the 4-piece effect of reduced skill cooldown when you trigger an electro reaction means that you can get 100% uptime on his skill. Situationally, one of Ayato's best sets. Yes, you heard that right, it can be his best set, for example, as a driver in a hyperbeam team. His personal damage will suffer compared to other sets, but his constant Hydro application with no downtime can be worth the overall team damage. Additionally, it's an incredibly fun set to run. When it comes to stat prioritization, it's attack followed by Hydro damage followed by crit. Like previously mentioned, his main scaling comes from attack. Even if he gains the Namasan buff based off his max HP, you still want to be using an attack stance. For a burst support playstyle, you can consider ER stance if you lack the ER substats to burst off cooldown. When we're talking about energy, his ER needs are going to change depending on what team you play him in and what rotation you use, as well as how many Fav procs, if any. Ayato is a super flexible unit and can be played in a lot of different team comps, so it will be hard to accurately estimate how much you need. The rotations also matter, because he will gain different value from his Ascension passive that gives him 2 energy per second he is off field when below 40 energy. Take this with a grain of salt, but generally his ER needs for on field will be around 125 to 140% range, and for a burst support 150 to 170%, but it can be as high as 200 plus. You should test the team you want to play him in and make sure you have sufficient energy to cover how you play him. Moving on to weapons, there's a lot of crit rate swords that work well with Ayato, so depending on what weapon you are using, it is likely that a crit damage circlet is more valuable to your build than crit rate to achieve a healthy crit ratio. Starting off with Haran Geppaku Futsu, Ayato's signature weapon and best in slot. The passive is very specifically designed with Ayato's kit in mind and can be hard to utilize well on other characters. Haran is his strongest option, but generally not recommended if you already own one of the next 2 5-star swords. Primordial Jade Cutter. Very high crit rate stat stick and also one of Ayato's best options. The passive is universal and unconditional and can be used on pretty much any sword character, making this a flexible and great option if you already own it. Mist Splitter Reforged, another very strong option for Ayato. It falls a little short of Haran and Jade Cutter, as Ayato will struggle to stay at maximum stacks during most rotations. Still an incredible option. The Black Sword, the Battle Pass weapon and generally considered Ayato's best 4-star option. A crit sword with a passive providing normal attack damage and a little bit of healing. Generally not worth going for refinements though. Wolfang, the newest Battle Pass weapon sword arriving with the release of Fontaine. The passive is not very useful for Ayato since his enhanced slashes count as normal attack damage and not skill damage. The Black Sword is a better option for Ayato, but Wolfang can still work as a crit stat stick. Lion's Roar, a great sword if you play Ayato in a team with electrocharge reactions to utilize its passive. Without the passive, the performance drops significantly and should not be considered compared to other options. Harbinger of Dawn R5, a great option if you're able to maintain its passive by staying above 90% health. Black Cliff Longsword, a solid option, good base attack and crit damage. You buy it from Paimon's Bargains, so I would not recommend going for refinements as a free-to-play player. Kazuha's Sword. The Cursed Blade is a good attack stat stick and free-to-play option, and the passive can be utilized by Ayato. The sword is obtained by playing through Kazuha's story quest. Skyward Blade. This can be a solid option with high ER needs, but generally does not provide enough to be considered even compared to the 4-star options. Aminoba. A craftable sword and an okay free-to-play option. As you often start your rotation with Ayato's Burst, the passive does nothing on your first rotation and you will get limited use of it overall as well. Typically just an attack stat stick. Moving on to team comps. Ayato is a very flexible unit that can be slotted into almost any team where you want Hydro. While I will be covering a broad range of team comps, there are many more options here. Make sure to comment below with any questions regarding character replacements and other rotations. I do my absolute best to answer all comments and I'm here to help. Starting off with Ayato Hyperform, this team consists of Ayato, Nahida, Kuki, and then a fill slot at the end. This team does it all. AoE damage, single target damage, reaction numbers popping up all over the screen. I'm a big fan of this one. For the last slot, you can use another Hydra unit such as Xingqiu or Yellen to help the ER requirements of Ayato and provide some additional off-field Hydra application. If using Xingqiu, you will also have the additional defense utility, damage reduction, and interruption resistance that in addition to Ayato's own will make him basically uninterruptible during his skill. Yellen will be a far more offensive option. Another option for the last slot is a second Electro unit. one that would not yoink the Hyper Bloom procs from your EM trigger. Both Beto and Fischl work great and will make the team proc a lot of Electrocharge reactions as well, enabling Thundering Fury to be an artifact option. Yaimiko is also another solid option and will be played as a more quick swap team. An additional option for the 4th slot is an Animo unit. Kazuha or Venti will work great if you want grouping, making Ayato's burst as well as the slight AoE of the Hyper Bloom Seed really pop off. Ayato's skill will reach enemies pulled in by Venti's burst and goes hand in hand with his quadratic scaling from their burst, so they have a very strong synergy together. My final recommendation for the fill slot would be a Cryo unit with off-field application to make it a Hyper Fridge team. Cryo does not interact with the Dendro Aura and both can exist on a target simultaneously. When your Hydro hits a target affected by both, you will cause a freeze reaction that weakens the Hydro, causing it to not remove as much Dendro as you normally would. This can make it so that you are able to create more blooms with the same Dendro application, so a team with DMC as a Dendro option compared to Nihida will see a greater gain from this interaction. Ayato version. This team consists of Ayato, Nihida, Toma, and a fill slot. Ayato version with Toma can be fun and efficient in AoE. The fill slot can be what you want: a healer, grouper, shielder, second Hydro, non-hyper blooming Electro, or Cryo will all work. General recommendations would be Kokomi or Fischl as the fill slot. Fun fact: using an Electro unit like Fischl will help stabilize the auras of your target, meaning you produce more seeds for Burgeon. Additionally, Electro will clear burning, making Fischl an incredible choice here. Electro and Dendro makes Quicken, which is technically a Dendro aura you can create a bloom off. Electro on Pyro makes Overload, removing the Pyro aura so you can reapply the auras to bloom faster. TLDR, adding a non-hyper blooming Electro to your Burgeon team makes you cause more Burgeon reactions. Keep in mind, hyper blooming Electro is not a bad option as well. You get both reactions instead of one and you still clear the burning effect. One of my favorite Burgeon teams is with Kazuha Pyro infusing his burst when paired with Bennett and acting as the Burgeon trigger of the team. Can be a strong AoE, but really falls short in single target damage. Ayato, Nilo, Bloom. This team consists of Ayato, Nilo, Nihida, and a Hydro or Dendro character. Io can work well in a Nilo Bloom team, most notably as a third Hydro unit with Nihida as the Dendro option. His AoE can really contribute to the Bloom generation in such a team if there are multiple enemies. Ayato, Mono Hydro. This team consists of Ayato, Furina, Jean, and Yelan. With the introduction of Furina, Ayato gains even more team options. Mono Hydro has gained significant value with the Hydro Archon, and this team really pops off. Jean is already a strong teammate to provide team-wide healing to utilize Furina's kit, shred resistance with VV, and if you have her C2, she also synergizes well with Ayato with her attack speed buff. Yelan being there for even further buffs on off-field damage. Furina also enables Ayato to use the Maruosi Hunter artifact set, and this is overall a fun and really strong team. Ayato Taser. This team consists of Ayato, Fischl, an Animo slot, and a fill slot. Ayato's Electrocharge teams can be quite strong. You can use other Animo units for grouping and buffing, but Kazuha is generally the best option. Recommended fill slot characters would be Beto or Xingqiu for a character with defensive utility, or Yelan for a more offensive character. You can replace Kazuha with Jean or Sayu, or use Kuki, Kokomi, or Bennett in the fill slot to consolidate your healer for the team. If you use an Animo healer like Jean, using Furina as the fill slot becomes a really strong option as well. Ayato Soup. This team consists of Ayato, Bennett, Kazuha, and Fischl. A soup of reactions, numbers, flying, everywhere, fun, and quite good. Electrocharged as a base reaction to enable the full EM Animo unit to deal a lot of reaction damage. Kazuha is the ideal Animo unit for this team, but Sucrose will also work fine. Jean can be an option with her Sunfire interaction between her and Bennett's burst, causing both Overlords and Scrolls with this team. Ayato Vaporize. This team consists of Ayato, Bennett, Shangling, and a fill slot, essentially creating an Ayato national team. The fill slots you should consider would be an Animo unit for VV and grouping such as Kazuha or Sucrose, or an off-field DPS such as Fischl, Xingqiu, or Yelan. Ayato is not the ideal Hydro unit in this team, with less skill uptime and Hydro application for a long duration like Shangling's burst compared to a unit like Child. Even though you can fit 2 skills in a rotation, you will most likely be losing out on some vapes during the downtime. His burst somewhat alleviates this issue during the skill downtime, and depending on the burst hits, you will not lose too many vapes. It's still a very strong team, and Ayato functions well in it. Ayato Freeze. This team consists of Ayato, Double Cryo, and Animo. Ayato once again works well in a freeze team, although he may not be the most optimal choice depending on what team you run him in. A fun team to play him in would be the Morgana team with Venti and Ganyu as teammates. Huge Hydro and Cryo fields stacked on top of each other, Venti sucking enemies in and projectiles piercing them all for a bunch of numbers everywhere. Another freeze team you could also try out is Ayato, Rosaria, Kaya, Kazuha, or Jean for some solid off-field crowd application and on letting your Ayato take the on-field Hydro role. He can also be useful on-field in an Ayaka freeze team should you want to play with their siblings together. Basically, as long as you have a Cryo unit, Ayato will be an option for freeze. Last but not least, Ayato Hyper Carry. This team consists of Ayato, Bennett, Yunjin, and Kazuha or Zhongli. This team aims to stack as many buffs as possible on Ayato for his personal damage to really shine. A team like this can typically underperform compared to other previous mentioned teams where more characters contribute to the total overall team damage with reactions and such. But seeing Ayato's high numbers can be fun and it still works. Final note, with how versatile Ayato is and how many teams he can be played in, the rotations will vary a lot depending on what you play him in and what role you play him as. For Hyper Balloon teams, it is strongly recommended to have enough ER on Ayato to burst every rotation, as the additional Hydro application when paired with a Denture unit like Nihita can be up to twice as many cores produced, which can really make a world of difference in the damage output of the team. Obviously, the same can be said in other teams where he relies on his burst, but I thought I would mention Hyperbloom specifically as it is one of his best performing teams, and it may not seem like such a big deal wanting to burst on him that often. The most important question, should you pull? If you love him, go for it. But in my personal opinion, I would not consider Ayato a must pull. With that being said, if you need a versatile character both on and off field with a ton of weapon and artifact options, allowing easy builds, he might be the right choice for you. From the quadratic scaling with incredible Hydro application of his burst to his rapid Hydro normal attacks, he can be an absolute blast to play. I would strongly suggest looking over your current roster and seeing if he can fit a role you need for your team comps. If so, go for it. If not, it might be worth saving your primos. As always, spend responsibly and always within your means. Ayato is a great unit and can be fully functional at C0. Thank you guys so much for watching my in-depth Ayato guide. This handsome husbando has held a warm place in our hearts since his first release. He offers amazing utility for multiple playstyles, and you'll surely not regret if you decide to pick him up. If you enjoyed the video, please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I put a ton of work into these videos, and it helps me more than you know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.